In this video, we're going to look at the structure and function of vitamins. So in biology, we learned about the various macronutrients, so carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, and nucleic acids. But now we're going to look at micronutrients, specifically vitamins and minerals. So vitamins are micronutrients and they're classified as such because we don't need them in such high quantities as all the other nutrients, so carbohydrates, lipids, and fats, and proteins. Micronutrients include both vitamins and then trace elements like calcium and potassium and so on. And vitamins are given letters so that we can identify them. So we're going to look at a few of those. All of them together are important for our growth and our repair of the body, like proteins, minerals, and water. And then vitamins and proteins and minerals and water can help us control our body processes. And then the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, their job is to supply us with energy. The first vitamin we're going to have a look at is vitamin A. So that includes retinol, and retinoic acid. And vitamin A its structure is a hexagonal ring, and it has 3 methyl groups, so one here, and one here. And then it has a 9-carbon conjugated chain with a hydroxyl group at the other end. So the one end is polar, and the remaining part of the molecule is nonpolar. Sources of vitamin A would be yellow-orange foods, butter, liver, and a few other sources. They have a low solubility in water because they only have that one hydroxyl group. So they get stored in our fatty tissues, and they can't be excreted through our urine. So we have to be careful with vitamins that are fat soluble because we can't get rid of them. So they can actually build up to toxic levels if you eat too much. But they are essential vitamins, so we have to have a fine balance. So one example of vitamin A is retinoic acid is involved in DNA transcription and our skin health. Retinol is important for our eye health, and it can either be eaten or it can be built from carotenoids. If you remember, the structure of beta carotene is here. It can be converted to retinol, which then is converted to retinol or retinoic acid. And retinol exists in 2 different forms, the cis configuration, which it has the bend, or the trans retinol. And it actually undergoes the cis to trans configuration to help us see things. So we're going to talk about that next. So now we'll talk about the function of retinol. So retinol binds to opsins, which are light-sensitive proteins in our rods and our cones in our eye. Rhodopsin binds to 11-cis-retinol, which has all double bonds in the trans position except for carbon 11. So you can see that right here, so carbon 11. When light hits rhodopsin, all the bonds convert to the trans position. So now it changes the bent tail to a completely linear tail. That changes the shape, which then sends a signal to the optic nerve to process the light. And then there are enzymes to convert the retinol back to the resting shape, which completes what's known as the visual cycle. So this is literally how we see. So there's actually a shift in shape of this molecule, which then sends information to our optic nerve, which helps us to process the light and interpret it as something that we see. Vitamin C is also known as ascorbic acid, and its structure is that it has a pentagonal ring, so not a 5-carbon ring. It's 4 carbons with 1 oxygen. It has some functional groups coming off, so there are 2 hydroxyl groups, 1 carbonyl, and then it has a short tail as well that has 2 hydroxyl groups. So you can see already that all of these functional groups are going to make this molecule polar. So it is going to be water soluble. So a lot of plants and animals can make vitamin C from carbohydrates, but humans don't have that ability. So some sources of vitamin C are berries, citrus fruit, and broccoli. Broccoli is actually a good source. Again, thanks to all of these hydroxyl groups, this molecule is polar. So if we accidentally ingest too much vitamin C, it's just simply removed from the body by urination. So some people will take high quantities of vitamin C to ward off colds. There's no conclusive evidence that it helps, but a lot of people do suggest that it does play a role in preventing colds or treating colds. It can be stored in the liver as well. So there are some animal sources of vitamin C possible. So if you eat liver and seafood, you can get some vitamin C, but it wouldn't be the quantity that you need. So the function of vitamin C is that it acts as an excellent antioxidant. So it acts as a reducing agent. So it gets oxidized and scoops up free radicals. And it scoops up protons and electrons, and those things can damage our tissues. So vitamin D exists in two different forms, D2 and D3. And this vitamin is modified from cholesterol, where one of the 4 carbon rings, this one, is broken. And so it's now just a 3 fused carbon rings. And the sun can catalyze the reaction to convert some of the cholesterol to vitamin D. So you're not actually absorbing vitamin D from the sun. The sun is acting as the catalyst to create vitamin D within our bodies. So we actually can synthesize vitamin D. However, if we can't synthesize enough vitamin D because we're not getting enough sun exposure, like in the wintertime, or our body doesn't have the ability to synthesize it properly, then we might need to take vitamin D supplements. And we'll talk about vitamin D deficiencies a little bit later, as well as deficiencies of some of the other vitamins. Egg yolks are a really good food source of vitamin D, if you wanted to know that. So again, this vitamin is nonpolar because, again, if you look back, there's only one hydroxyl group, so that's the rest of it is hydrocarbons, functional groups. So this is nonpolar. So this might have been also is stored in the fatty tissue. So you can't take too much. And there's actually been some incidences of vitamin D overdoses since COVID because there seems to be a correlation between vitamin D deficiency and severity of COVID infections. So some people were over supplementing themselves with vitamin D. So vitamin D assists in absorbing a lot of our minerals. So calcium, zinc, iron, magnesium, and phosphate. So again, without enough vitamin D, we would have trouble absorbing these necessary minerals in our intestine. So that could lead to malnutrition. And we'd also have difficulty building strong bones and fighting viral infections, which is where that link to vitamin D deficiency and COVID came from. Vitamin B is another vitamin. It comes actually in 8 different forms, and you've probably heard about them either in their letter number combination or their name. So B1 is thiamine, B2 is riboflavin, B3 is niacin, B9 is folic acid. There's B12 as well. They all have very different shapes, but all of them are water soluble. And vitamin B acts as a coenzyme. So here are some examples. So thiamine is needed to break down carbohydrates and protein. So they help the enzymes that do that. Folic acid is a coenzyme that helps close the neural tube. So if you remember in biology when we were learning about neural development, the neural tube is the tube that surrounds the spinal cord. So if it doesn't close properly, fetuses can develop something known as spina bifida. So those are 2 examples. So their sources of vitamin B would be legumes, whole grains, banana, turkey, and tuna. And an interesting fact is when we process grains to make them like white bread and so on, we lose the B vitamins. So we often will fortify processed grains before packaging them because we've lost them. So even though white bread has lost its vitamin B, it's often re-added in making white bread and so on. B12 can only be obtained through animal products, so strict vegans really do need to take a supplement or they will have difficulty in building red blood cells. And a symptom of vitamin B12 deficiency is fatigue. Our next vitamin is another fat-soluble vitamin, vitamin E, and you can see why it's fat-soluble because there's only the one functional group and the rest of them are all non-polar. So they're made of tocopherols. So tocopherols are the compounds that make up E vitamins. They all have fused carbon rings and a long hydrocarbon tail. And again, they're non-polar, so we store them in our fatty tissues. And vitamin E, a good source would be vegetable oils, and their job again is to act as antioxidants. So I'm sure you can start seeing the pattern. This is vitamin K, and again, non-polar, so will be fat soluble. Vitamin K has two fused rings again and a long tail. Its job is to help with blood clotting, and a source of vitamin K would be dark leafy vegetables. And actually, we have bacteria that live in our intestine that help build vitamin K as well. This is a summary table to show all the different vitamins we've just discussed and whether they're water or fat soluble, their source, and then their main functions. We've talked about all of them already, but you can pause this and take a look for some further detail if you wish. So now we're going to take a look at different vitamin deficiencies. The first one is vitamin A deficiency, and vitamin A deficiency is the leading cause of blindness worldwide, which is a really sad fact because it's a preventable type of blindness. So it's predominant in countries where there's low meat consumption and there are few crops that are rich in vitamin A. It can also happen in people that have liver damage because the liver is where it stores our vitamin A. So there have been some programs put into place to combat vitamin A deficiency. One of them would be creating genetically modified organisms, genetically modified foods like golden rice, which is a GMO. There has been some controversy over golden rice for a few reasons. One, the golden rice has been patented, so you have to purchase the seeds. You cannot collect the seeds and plant them again, or you will have to pay huge fines for stealing the grain and the seed and the patent rights. Secondly, golden rice, while it does have vitamin A spliced in from, I believe, marigolds, the problem is if you don't eat enough of it, you're still not getting a sufficient amount of vitamin A. So some people might eat the golden rice thinking that they're getting a sufficient amount when they still aren't. Vitamin D deficiency is seen in places where there's less sunlight during parts of the year and people with certain medical conditions that can't absorb or produce the vitamin D. So this deficiency can lead to a condition called rickets. And you can see a child here that has rickets. Their long bones actually have curved because they weren't able to make strong bones because of the deficiency. Because vitamin D assists and helps us form our bones by allowing the calcium to be absorbed from the food. So it can also lead to, a deficiency can lead to osteoporosis, certain cancers, and depression. So vitamin D is important. It also can affect your immune system, your ability to fight viral infections. A deficiency in vitamin C can lead to a condition called scurvy, And we used to see it in people that spent months at sea because they were away from land and weren't able to access fresh fruit. Some early symptoms of vitamin C deficiency would be fatigue and gum pain, but then they can lead to your teeth actually loosening and falling out, bone pain, an inability to heal your wounds, so you have open wounds that aren't healing, and then eventually even death. So vitamin C deficiency is a huge problem. And again, you can avoid it by eating fresh fruits and vegetables or taking a supplement again. Another nutrient deficiency is actually called beriberi, which is vitamin B1 or thiamine deficiency, and we can treat this one with supplementation. And this is quite interesting. So the symptoms are weight loss, swelling, weakness, and lower sensory perception. So you might not notice if your sensory receptors are being stimulated. And this disorder is common where what is known as polish rice was eaten. So that's rice where only the inner white part is eaten and the husk is thrown away, because the husk is where the vitamin B1 or thiamine is found. So eating, again, processed foods is a problem, because sometimes you lose those important nutrients and minerals and vitamins. Our next nutrient deficiency is pellagra, which is a vitamin B3 deficiency. And the symptoms of this deficiency are the 3Ds: diarrhea, dementia, and dermatitis. Death will happen in 4 to 5 years, but again, it can be treated with supplementation, so you can avoid the condition and the eventual death. And we first saw this nutrient deficiency when maize was spread throughout the world after being shared with the settlers that arrived in Mexico. So in Mexico, where maize was first originated, the corn was soaked in lime water, which is an alkaline solution, not limes as in the fruit, but lime water. And it would make it softer and make it easier to eat. This practice wasn't used elsewhere. So the maize was taken, but that practice of soaking before eating wasn't adopted. So then the niacin wasn't absorbed when eating the corn, because without that process, the corn wasn't being was releasing the niacin and making it readily absorbed. So vitamin E deficiency occurs in people with medical conditions where people are having trouble absorbing fats. And the treatment for vitamin E deficiency is supplementation. Again, and then the symptoms for this are vision loss, anemia, and the inability to fight disease. So again, vitamin D and E are important for our functioning of our immune system. And again, if you can't absorb fats, you might not be absorbing the vitamin E, and then that's why you need the supplements. If you have a vitamin K deficiency, so you're not eating leafy green vegetables, or your large intestine isn't able to produce it with the bacteria that live there, you can end up with blood clotting issues. The symptoms are petechia, which is when the tiny blood vessels under the skin are bursting, and it looks like bruising is happening right under the surface of the skin, and it can actually look a little dotty, little purple dots under your skin, and an ability to stop your blood flow, so you can't wound heal, you can't clot your blood, which is a bad thing. And it's standard to give a vitamin K supplement to newborns, just in case they're not yet ready to produce vitamin K with their intestine. So again, here's a helpful hint found in Cognity, an exam tip. You're not required to know the names of any of the specific medical conditions or diseases caused by vitamin deficiency, but you should have an understanding of how the deficiency of a vitamin could lead to general health effects and prevention and treatment options. So you don't need to know the term scurvy, but you should know that vitamin C deficiency would lead to the features that it exhibits, or vitamin K and so on.